Inspiring voices, building worlds. The Ampliverse.
And welcome to another edition of the Autistic Delicatessen. I'm your host, Larno, along with Shalise.
I'm Shalise of Autistic Travel Goddess.
And also, she's the co-host of this show right here. But we have a nice show for today. We got this person that's involved with Concept Cafe's Coffee named Mike. And he's going to talk to us about how he's able to fuse metalheads and bikers into the different types of coffee styles. He's connected with Cannibal Corpse, he's connected with Ministry and different ones, so it should be very interesting, so please stay tuned for that. But first off, since we're in the month of October and since we're in very scary times usually during this month, let's get into a very scary topic that me and Shalise are going to talk about, which is called hospital food. So it depends on how you look at it, though. At times in hospitals, there tends to be like, a Starbucks or sometimes a McDonald's. It depends on like what hospitals you have, or sometimes there's the cafeteria food that can sometimes be good and not so good. So, Shalise, from your experience being in the hospital, have you ever had any good hospital food, or has it been like just okay?
So most of the time when I go to the hospital, the food is very mediocre and bland, but I recently had a good experience. I just got some nasal surgery done. And during my hospital stay, I was served dinner where I had some good old chicken noodle soup. I had a fresh salad. I had yogurt, and the food was very solid. And I had me some real fresh green beans along with some salmon. But then, there was another time that I was hospitalized last year, and the food was very bland and trashy. And I think it depends on the type of hospital you go to. And I think it also depends too on, the state that you're in, even with the resources that the hospital gets. But yeah, there have been times I've had some really bland, dirt, nasty looking food.
And has there ever been a time, I don't know if this is true at all hospitals, but has there been ever an option to have rice pudding or something?
There is, the option from what I've seen to have something soft like rice pudding, applesauce, things like that. That's the, options I've seen, for soft diets.
Because I know, like, after certain surgeries, they would have you have more of the softer foods or have
Mhm.
certain liquids, of course, besides the
Yeah.
water, but, yeah. Because I've been to some hospitals, not to be sick or anything like that, because
Mhm.
you tend to, one of the things I notice that is consistent in hospitals is the smells, though. You can easily, it smells like medicine, though, it's
Yeah, it
just like
just
the
has that
hospital
like
use.
industrialized, well, yeah, I don't want to say, I guess institutionalized smell that it has, full of chemicals and pills and cleaning supplies. Like it just smells like a mixture of all of that in a hospital.
Yeah. I've had some hospital food in the past, but it's been basically good, in the cafeteria, because sometimes they will have some good options.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
like, to me, it hasn't really been bad, like, in a sense, thank goodness, because if the food was bad, it would be more of like, I probably wouldn't have trust the idea of even having anything at a hospital or something, unless
Right.
you just bring your own food or have a family
Definitely.
member or a friend bring stuff. And it's like, hey, can you bring this? Or hey, can you stop by this fast food place and give me some of that?
My sister, I was hospitalized years ago, and my sister wanted to bring me some fresh home cooked food that my mom made, and the
Yeah.
hospital that I was at didn't allow it. And their reasoning
Oh.
was that they didn't want people, putting substances and hiding drugs and stuff in the food, and they said it was a liability, which I was disappointed because the food that they served when I was there was inedible. So, yeah.
And that's the other thing too, and all that stuff. It's not good when the food at the hospital is inedible,
Yeah,
including like some of the pudding. Though it's just,
right.
yeah. Because I'm sure there's has to be certain times too, which I'm sure you probably already mentioned, that the pudding was not always as good. Like, you
No,
know,
it was too sweet. And sometimes the food is surprisingly unhealthy in a hospital. You don't
oh,
even believe some of the things they serve. Like one time I had pudding for dessert and it was so sweet. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, what if a patient's diabetic? Like, but I mean, there are
that's another thing. Yeah.
options. Of course, there are options like that. But my thing is, why serve this in a hospital? Because people who are in a hospital, they don't need to be like eating anything that's going to hurt them health wise, anything too sweet. And then, there are, like, I know for behavioral health, like mental health hospitals, they tend to be very picky about the food they serve. Like, for instance, they won't serve you cranberry juice because a lot of times the cranberry juice comes in like a container that can be used to create, harm yourself with. And so they try to give you stuff in a paper cup. They try to give you anything that can be served on paper because if they try to give
Paper.
you stuff, mhm, yeah, like you can't use real forks, you can't use, any standard silverware. It has to be some sort of paper version of it.
I would think it would be more plastic than paper, though. But
But they
interesting.
consider plastic, and like the plastic cups that the cranberry juice comes in tends to be something that you can use to harm yourself with it. So they want to give it to you on
Uh,
a paper cup. So they
uh.
won't even give you certain things if it comes in, anything that could be used that they deem something is harmful.
Now, in terms of the cups, would they sometimes use styrofoam? Because
Yeah,
sometimes with styrofoam, this is something that when I was a kid, like I don't know, whenever I hear the sounds of styrofoams, I would just grit
yeah.
my teeth. Though I would be uncomfortable for
I
right
don't
there.
personally, styrofoam feels gross to me because of the texture of it. But
Uh
a lot of hospitals do use styrofoam. But from what I've seen in recent times, they starting to use the paper products now, the recycled paper products.
okay. Well, we went from one interesting topic into another interesting conversation. So now here's our interesting conversation with Mike of Concept Cafe's Coffee. So, Mike, welcome to the Autistic Delicatessen.
Hey, thanks, Larnell and Shalise, for having me. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Now, Mike, I just think you have such an interesting concept with your coffee company in terms of connecting with like metal bands, metal heads, and bikers. Because usually people, when they think of coffee, they think of it as more of like for intellectuals, working class people, suburbanites, or else like people that are hipsters or something. And then for metalheads, they're more connected to energy drinks or beer, or bikers connected more to beer, more of like the Miller Lite type stuff or whatever. So, what got you into that concept of wanting to do anything remotely connected to coffee for metalheads and bikers?
Well, that's actually a great question. And I just kind of go back to my roots of what I think coffee is and what I think it should be. And, I came of age, in regards to my high school years and college years and all that good stuff back in the 90s. And I think coffee culture and coffee house culture was really different back then, and that's kind of what I grew up with. Back then, coffee houses were very DIY, do it yourself, and very independent. Not that they're not independent today, but kind of more of a kind of on the fringe independent, if I may use that word. And you had, it was more artistic, I think, and it was a lot more supportive of the arts, in regards to whether that was fine art, whether that was performance art or music or whatnot. I mean, we're talking, people were doing spoken word, people were doing poetry slams. You could go to a coffee house, and whether it was somebody doing an acoustic set, by themselves, like a solo performer. I mean, people like Jewel got their, start in coffee houses in the 90s, and, that was a big thing. And look what happened to her. And, even seeing, punk and hardcore bands and independent music and even metal bands to a degree, it was my experience in going, to, coffee houses back then. And I kind of thought that was missing in today's coffee, and coffee house culture. And I kind of wanted to have a renaissance of it, or a resurgence of that. And, I figured the only way we could really do that, since, as you were saying, coffee's become very cookie cutter. It's almost kind of like when you go to a coffee house, or a coffee shop now, it's kind of like walking through a home goods store. It's very, taupe. It's very, um, pastel colored. It's very clean. It's very just, kind of milk and honey, it's just kind of just standard. And, going from one to another, you kind of lose yourself in it going kind of, well, where's, the independence here? What differentiates one from another? And, when you have, coffee, in over 2 billion cups, served daily globally, people are very diverse in regards to cultures, in regards to race, in regards to creeds, and again, when you're talking about 2 billion cups served, that incorporates a lot of people. And I only think coffee culture here in the US represents just a very small fraction or a decimal of even like 1% of people out there. And I think it's lost on people, and especially good coffee. I think, people are just so used to like, oh my gosh, I got to get my coffee. I got to go to get a supermarket, whatever. I'm just going to pull something off the shelf and hope that I like it. And that's where we came in, where, we want to incorporate it and say, hey, Larnell, hey, Charlize, what are you into? Are you into music? Are you into performing arts? Are you into sports? How can we create a better coffee experience for you? Because it's not just, coffee. It's something that you love. It's just kind of like, being a kid again, when you're going down the cereal aisle and you're looking at, hey, this cereal box, I'm into sports, so I'm going to buy the Wheaties box, or I'm into, something else. I'm into toys, so I'm going to get the Captain Crunch box. So we really wanted to connect people more with these coffee experiences, but also match it up and pair it with something, they love. And again, I mean, it's a big mission for us. It's an uphill battle against what it is, but I think all good things start from, trying to change, what the status quo is. And that's really been our mission from the start.
You touched on a really important statistic about the thousands of coffee cups that are sold. And that's a lot of people and that's a lot of diversity. So
Mm-hmm.
that being said, do you get a lot of African Americans, especially in the rocker sector or the metal sector, that are, like the African American metalheads per se, that you serve coffee to? Like, do you experience that a lot coming into your shop?
Yeah. And, just to clarify, we're actually not a retail coffee shop. We do sell through retail partners, everybody from venues to, record shops, all that good stuff. But, majorly, the majority of our business is online and e-commerce through social media and, websites. And that's a great question. And the best way to put it is, I actually went to a show when, our partner, well, I'm sure, Cavalera, Max and Igor and their band, were in town a couple Fridays here in Orlando. And it's the first show that, admittedly, ashamedly, I've been to in a little while. It's just been, it's so busy running the business. But when I went there, it was kind of interesting to see. And I always kind of like to see like who's coming to the shows and whatnot. And it was a very, compared to, 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, you see within the heavy metal community a lot more diversity. And again, it was just a lot more women, a lot more African Americans, a lot more Hispanic people, a lot more Asian people, and it was great to see. I mean, the heavy metal community has always been a very inclusive brotherhood and sisterhood of people, but you're seeing a lot more, and that I think that's cross generational too. I think you're seeing a lot younger kids at shows, and then you're seeing a lot of older people coming out, surprisingly too. I mean, I'm in my mid 40s, and we had people there, who were in their mid 60s and 50s. I mean, of course, they're not moshing in the pit or anything like that, but in regards to coffee, yes, I mean, we're seeing a lot of diversity, in the people who are purchasing, our products, especially in a lot of foreign countries, whether that's South America, because people don't realize we actually ship coffee to about 5 continents right now, because the United States doesn't produce any coffee, but a lot of countries, even Europe does not produce any coffee, but they import more coffee per capita than anywhere else in the world. So we're seeing, and I think a lot, America is obviously a very, diverse country. But there's a lot of diversity in countries like United Kingdom. I mean, huge diverse places like Germany or Spain, and we're seeing a lot of diversity in the in the coffee sales. Another interesting statistic that we didn't even think about when we first got into it was the armed services. And especially the Navy. We get a lot of midshipmen and whatnot who are stationed abroad or in the United States, and we get the shipping address, and it's the USS ship whatever. There's a lot of diversity, obviously, in the military, and we see that come through on the coffee sales. And so, yes, I mean, I guess to answer your question in summary, when we initially got into this, we were kind of like, we have no idea. And that was one of the projects that we wanted. One of our mission statements was we want to not only open up the different subcultures that, whether it's music or motorcycles, that we, go to their existing fan base, but also build it through coffee, because I think just coffee is the great communicator of the world and very communal. We were surprised at the amount of diversity and especially the amount of women like yourself seeing, like, we're like, wow, 40% of this band's fan base who are buying the coffee are women, which in the heavy metal community, it was, it's kind of unheard of sometimes. So.
Oh yes, and for a long time, metal was very male dominated, and now you see more inclusivity, more diversity, gender wise, religious wise, even racial wise, and
absolutely.
I think when you look at the lyrics of a lot of heavy metal music, in and of itself, it's inclusive, and it relates to the underdog. Like, a lot of the heavy metal music is designed to be relatable to who is considered, the underdog, the outcast, those who feel kind of, how do I say it, eccentric compared to their peers. Like, a lot of us are attracted to heavy metal, and so I think that's what draws a lot more diversity to the genre of music, only because a lot of people are finding that they can relate to those lyrics.
Absolutely, and I would say so. It's good to see in the United States. I grew up in the 80s in Europe, in places like Germany and Italy, and military brat and whatnot. And that's really when I first started getting into heavy metal music. And in Europe, it's always been there, and it's been always huge. I mean, you go to a festival over in like Wacken in Germany, or one of the many festivals, Hellfest or whatnot, and you see, like, European fans come out, and young, old, it doesn't matter. Sex doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. And they're into it. And, and everybody's out there having a good time. And I kind of grew up with that. And the United States, I really didn't have that for a long time. But I will say, ever since the U.S. got on more of having festivals, like they do in Europe, that it's reached out to a lot of people, because it's no longer the smaller club shows. It's no longer something that people are going to feel like, so you can go to a festival and check out, whether it's Louder Than Life or Rockville or Aftershock, which is coming up in California. There's so many bands out there that there's something for everybody, and there's so many people, and it's just very inclusive. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's kind of like the U.S. was, behind for a long time on that, of what Europe was doing. So I'm glad to see that's kind of, come across the pond here to the United States.
And really, like, it's very good to, like, hear you say that, Mike. We were talking offhand at first, like, about the whole idea of how you connected with these different bands that, currently when you go on conceptcafes.com, you can find like, coffee blends or flavors from like Cannibal Corpse and Ministry, as well as some others though. So I'm just wondering, like, when you first start your coffee company and first had an idea to basically connect with these bands that have been around since like some of the 80s and some of the 90s and all that stuff, like, how did you go to their management and basically pitch the idea of, hey, I want to do some coffees for your tours or something? Like how did that work?
That's a great question. And the first artist we ever worked with is Cannibal Corpse, and a lot of people know that, and that's how this really came about. And we're just very thankful and honored uh, that the guys in Cannibal, their management and their merch company and whatnot, has given us the opportunity. But how it all started off was it was actually a bet. And it was a bet that I thought I was making with somebody else, but the entire time I was making it with myself, if that makes sense. And it came down to we were looking more at getting into the retail space before we even came up with this idea for concept cafes. And we toiled with some ideas on the private label, but we weren't really, it was just experimental, back then. And I made this bet to myself because we had a business deal that was going on, with somebody else. And, like all things, when it came down to it, it just wasn't the right fit and wasn't going to work out. And, obviously, me personally, I was, upset, and, I put on some metal music and was just kind of like, this is going to help support me and help me get through this moment of, because I had invested financially, invested a lot of time and, effort into it. And I was like, I'm angry, I'm upset, and I made a bet to myself, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to show everybody, and I'm going to show them, here's my little piece of revenge or whatever, if you want to call it like that. I laugh at it now looking back, but I said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make the most heaviest, the most brutal, the most crazy coffee in the world, on the planet. I'm just going to go crazy on this. So I reached out to our head artist, Marina, who we're already working with at the time. And I said, Marina, I want to pitch Cannibal Corpse a coffee. And let's come up with the craziest artwork ever. It's going to look like a horror movie. It's going to look crazy. We're going to put this on a coffee bag. So we got to work on it. And I kind of had the idea in my head, and we put it down on, paper, and, drew it out. And I was like, you know what? I have no idea of what I'm doing. I don't work in the entertainment industry. I don't work in the music industry. I don't work for a record label. I don't know who to contact. So literally I went on social media, started messaging the guys in Cannibal Corpse, and, there's 5 of them. So I was like, hopefully I got a good shot at somebody's going to respond. And I sent the artwork over to Paul and Merzorkowitz, who's the drummer of Cannibal and one of the founding members. And Paul messaged back, and he was like, man, that artwork looks sick. And I was like, hey, do you want to make a coffee? And he said, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, and he's over in Tampa too, which is, the home of death metal, and, where you're from, Larnell, it's only, a hop, skip, and a jump from Orlando. So he was stoked, and he said, let's start talking about this and let's get it going. And I was like, this is cool, blah, blah, blah. And we got together, and we spent about 9 months working with their artist, who is the, very well-known, legendary in both the horror and the heavy metal industry, Vince Locke. And, Vince doesn't live in Florida. He actually lives up in Michigan. And we started working with him over the months and getting everything perfect before we released it. But that's honestly, how it all started was, on this bet. And then now that I look back onto it, because I was actually recently asked this question for another interview, and I just said, it's funny, the entire time I thought I was, betting somebody else, I was going to show them up or whatnot. And the entire time I was just kind of betting against myself and betting against, our team that, we can, pull this off. And, side note, to this day, but between me and Marina, our artist, and the people who work at our company, and the people at the Cannibal Corpse camp, nobody's actually even seen the original art that we first came up with. And we're kind of like, we're never going to show it. That's just for us. We're going to keep it hidden away. No disrespect to anybody else, but that's our personal thing.
Me and Shalice, like, just to admit you this, Mike, growing up, I really wasn't much of a metal head and all that stuff, but in recent years, like, I started to get, more into it, and my music ideas have changed and all that stuff, so me and Shalise were talking offhand, and she's a person that likes, bands like Korn and all that type of stuff.
Mhm.
So, have you thought about like those people or some of the other new metal bands, or even like System of a Down being the next ones to possibly go to them about doing coffee collaborations or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those bands have been on the radar. And new metal is actually, when you're talking about Korn and you're talking about System of a Down and bands that are kind of the pioneers and the legends of the new metal scene, and some other bands who are kind of grew out of that, like a System of a Down, or and bands that really came after that, or that are following in that footsteps. And I don't think a lot of people appreciated new metal at the time. Again, I'm not a metal historian or anything like that, and these are just my personal opinions and perspectives. But I think at the time, even personally myself, I don't think I appreciated it enough. But now, when you're talking, a couple decades later, and you're looking back and you're saying, wow, they actually at the time, and some people thought it was a joke. And I mean, but if you look at the amount of influence and the amount of impact that it's had on the music industry, whether it's rock and roll or heavy metal or hip hop or even pop, it's phenomenal. And I think, to what you were saying, Larnell, I think people have access to more music before or now than ever before. I mean, even when new metal was, really hitting it, in the mid 90s and early 90s and just having its beginning, I mean, there was no, I mean, you couldn't go on Napster, you couldn't go on any Apple Music or streaming or anything like that. I mean, you literally had to go to a record store, and depending on your economic status or where you were located, it was hard to find out music.
And just to cut in there, what you were talking about new metal, like I was thinking about even the sound of Slipknot, because when you think about
Yeah,
the sound of Slipknot, you can
absolutely.
say like their style kind of came from like the Korn style, because Korn was kind of like, if I'm correct, one of the first to really build the
Yes,
modern new metal, merging like some elements of hip hop and just some rock and all that stuff and fuse it together. Because without them, you wouldn't have had like a Slipknot
absolutely.
or even the Deftones or something like that.
Absolutely, 100%. And we've reached out to, of course, we're not just about one genre of heavy metal or music. And yeah, I mean, that our goal is to do what the fans and want us to do, and that's kind of our conversations we have with the artists too. It's just got to work for everybody. So as far as working with a band like Korn, which Korn, unfortunately for us, I mean, fortunate for the fans, they already have a coffee label that's out, and they were actually at Sick New World in Las Vegas, and they had a line, from what I hear, I wasn't at the event, but they had a line that was a couple hundred feet, a couple hundred people deep for 4 weekends. So kudos, congrats to them. They're doing a phenomenal job with it. But yeah, I mean, there are bands that, like a System of a Down, and other, bands that were new metal or have grown out of that we've reached out to and definitely considered working with, because it all comes down to, like, if it's something that we think we can help them out to reaching more fans and creating a great experience for the existing fans, we're willing to do it, because I'm just not a metalhead. I mean, I listen to all types of music. I always have. That's just something I like, diversity in music. So yeah, definitely.
Excellent. I think the way that you started, just that determination to get out there and make the sickest coffee ever, I really think that drive that you have, that is amazing. That's really important for any entrepreneur
Thank you.
to have.
Really seriously appreciate that. And I mean, that's just how I've approached things, whether it's in this or, in other businesses and whatnot. I've always had that rebel kind of mentality where it's kind of like,
Yes.
I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it different from what you're telling me to do it in 180 degrees and go against the grain. And for no other, it's horrible because it's more difficult. It makes it harder on yourself. It's more, blood, sweat, and tears and pain. And, it's doing it the hard way. But I get, for some reason, I just get some satisfaction of trying to figure out
Oh,
how to do it in a different way. And that's,
absolutely.
I guess, the best way I can explain it.
it's exciting when you can go to the road less traveled. When you can travel the path that's least traveled and you succeed in it, it makes you feel like you carved out and you're a pioneer or something. So
Absolutely, and I kind of owe that, to my dad. And he told me once, he was kind of like, one of those coming of age conversations. What do you want to do with your life and whatnot, and getting very, esoteric or existential, whatever you want to call it. And he said, at the end of the day, I mean, like, you can't take money. The only thing you can really show in this life is how you impacted the world, and whether you impacted people, whether you touched somebody, touched the lives of people, whether you had a family, or whether you did this. And it just got to me thinking of, like, life is short enough as it is. So I think the only thing that you can do is, like, leave the biggest footprints that you did something and that you were here. And if people can remember that for another generation to come, I think it's a life well lived. And I think, I hope people kind of share that mentality. I know some people don't and some people do, but for me personally, I think it's a great, driving force and mentality to have, to just say, like, hey, Mike existed at some point and he did something.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, though. We want to thank you for being on the show. But before we go, is there any way where people can be able to purchase the coffee? Like, obviously go on conceptcafes.com, but is there any other way through social media that people can follow your business to be able to support?
Yeah, absolutely. Going to the website. So we try to be very active on Instagram with updates of what's going on, who we're working with, where we're going to be, and whatnot. So that's the best way to follow us, is on Instagram. We're trying to do more on Facebook, but so many people have migrated over to Instagram. We're working on TikTok and Threads and everything else coming up. But most the best place to follow us is on Instagram. We are going to be releasing some new labels, some additional labels coming up before the end of the year that are in production, which we're really excited for. Can't spill the beans, just yet, literally. But we do have, and it's not just going to be metal music. I mean, we're reaching out. We're looking at different sports, not your traditional sports. I mean, we've looked at some wrestling, trying to break into that world, and some more extreme sports. That's something we want to broaden our horizon in, and different entertainment. So yeah, exciting things to come. Locally, here in Florida, you can probably find some of our coffees at local record stores and whatnot. And if they're not there, I mean, tell them that they should carry it. That's great for us, and we appreciate that. One of the big events we do have coming up that people might be interested and will see us at is the Spooky Empire convention here in Orlando, which is their 20th year, and it's going to be their biggest year yet. We were there last year. Last year was our first year, but we've kind of doubled down this year. We're getting a huge corner booth, very prominent. We're actually partnering with one of our partners who does actually baked goods for the heavy metal world, who's going to be there as well. But we're really looking forward to that. I believe that is the end of this month here in Orlando. I forget what hotel it is off the top of my head, but yeah, definitely come out and see us there. If you like horror, you like coffee, and you like heavy metal, I mean, it's the place to be.
Mike, we'd like to thank you for coming on to the Autistic Delicatessen and really just sharing with us these nice coffees, as well as like the history of it and the connection with that with music. So we wish you the best with your company, and again,
thank you guys for having me so much. Appreciate being here. And I watched before I came on here. I watched actually a couple of your episodes, and I especially like the one that was it Punk Rock Pizza?
Yeah, it was Punk Rock Pizza. It was like pop.
Yeah,
like it was like a show that was that. Yeah.
I love that episode, and I watched that, and I was like, I think you guys, are what you're doing is kind of mirrors what we're doing, and I think it's great. I wish you guys all the best of luck, and love to be on again. And I love the spirit you guys have in doing this. It's so cool. I mean, like, again, going back to, like, when I grew up in the 90s, and it was like, you could talk to people on AOL and and through zines and whatnot. I think podcasts are awesome. I'm kind of a newbie to listening to them, so I love it, man. Just keep doing what you guys are doing, and I'm a fan, definitely.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Autistic Delicatessen. If you want to find this more, please go on to our new Instagram handle, which is instagram.com/theautisticdelicatessen. Check out our podcast and check out our YouTube at theampliverse.com/theautisticdelicatessen. And also anything else, theautisticdelicatessen.carrd.co, which is CARRD.co.
Oh, yes. You can check me out at Autistic Travel Goddess on Instagram, on YouTube, and on my TikTok. I'm Autistic Millionaire. Until next time.
What's on your plate is how we relate.